Marvel's brand new presentation, Werewolf by Night, is now released on Disney+. But the question that does remain, is Werewolf by Night actually scary? Or how scary is it? We're going to talk about that right now. The way this is going to work is that I'm going to categorize how scary this movie is into 4 different types of brackets. The first one is how much gore is in the movie. The second one is the amount of kills that are in here. The third one is how violent is the antagonist and how violent is the movie in general. And the fourth one is how many jump scares are in the movie, and are the jump scares in here actually scary? And in order for this bracket to be successful is to count out how much blood is in here, the amount of gore that takes place, whether or not it's disgusting, and how much torture do the characters go through, and do we as the audience feel or see anything torturous while watching the movie? So how bloody is Werewolf by Night? Well, in terms of blood compared to any other MCU film, you could say that there's definitely plenty in here, but as for what it is on its own, there isn't really much. When people die and they're getting killed, there's like few aspects of blood being spewed out here and there, but it isn't as gushing or overwhelming as you would expect in a regular horror film. It's the amount of blood that you would expect in a regular MCU film. Surprisingly enough, there's a little more gore in here than I was expecting. There are some limbs that are being cut off, some people get decapitated. And in terms of torture, some of these characters go through some pretty bad death, which we'll get to up next, but some of those emphasis in terms of being torture are there within a mental aspect than there is within a brutality aspect. But the fact that they're lending in any kind of aspect in here instead of none is still saying a lot. So for the amount of blood that's in here, I would give it a 1.5 out of 5. For the gore, I would say it's a 3 out of 5. And for torture, it gets itself a 2.5 out of 5. And if you calculate all 3 of these categories together, the bloody section is calculated up to being 7 out of 15. The next bracket we're going to be talking about is the amount of kills that are in the movie, and what succeeds for this bracket is whether or not it warrants the R rating that it actually gets, or if it is PG-13, does it need an R rating? And if there are any kills in here, how grotesque can they be? And for a main protagonist, does it feel like that there are several traps where it feels like there's a lot less room to escape? And that could be taking place either physically, where there's a literal trap onto them, or mentally, where it feels like inside of their head there isn't really much room to escape. So for the kills aspect, this one is the one I was the most surprised about, because there are at least 10 kills that happen in this presentation, and all of them work wonderfully well. In fact, it works so good that at times it feels like that it was close to being rated R material. And if it would have went towards the rated R route, I think that it would have managed to accomplish of being one of the best Marvel contents that's actually been created. But when you actually look at the kills themselves, you can still tell that, at least to some aspect, they're kind of fake. They don't give you the illusion that these people actually did die in reality, which I guess is the intention, considering that back in the 1930s or 40s old classic horror movies, they weren't necessarily great at making you think that people are actually dead, but in other aspects, it works fairly well. Now, in terms of traps where people barely have room to escape, I say that it works in some retrospect, because in terms of a classic monster movie, some people are going to die and there isn't really much room to escape. But to be honest, in a horror movie, you would want to not be expected on which characters are there to live and which ones are there to die. And here, you know who's going to live and die. So in the end, for the mature rating, I would say it gives itself definitely a 4 out of 5. For the grotesque aspect, it gets a 3 out of 5, and for the traps, to be honest, I think this rating gets itself a 1.5 out of 5. And when adding all 3 of these brackets up, the kill rating gets itself an 8.5 out of 15. The next bracket that we're going to be talking about is how violent can the movie get? How violent are our characters? What's their personality like? Do these characters have no ambition to stop what it is that they're going to be doing? And how brutal can the movie get? Okay, so let's go into the discussion. How violent is this movie? For the personality, it absolutely exceeds within that aspect, because if you do look at who the main protagonists are, you can see some of the relentlessness that is contained inside some of the other characters. I can't say the same for all of our characters, but that's only including the main protagonists though. But with that main protagonist, it does actually fall short of the ambition of not stopping whatever it is that they're doing section. Because with one of those main protagonists, they have to succumb to one of their inner demons because they don't necessarily have much of a choice. If they did have a choice and they decided to choose that relentless, and he decided to choose that kind of brutality action, then the motivation ratings would have been a little bit more higher. So in terms of the personality, I would give this one an absolute 5 out of 5. But for the motivation section, I would give it a 3 out of 5. And for how brutal this section is, just because it gives us a good bit of kills and some of the story in here works fairly well, I give it a 3 out of 5. So when calculating all three of these brackets, bracket for violence lends itself out to being 11 out of 15. And the final bracket that we're going to be talking about is the jump scares. We're going to be talking about how many jump scares are in the movie. Do they actually work, or do they work effectively? Can they linger on where they can make a good impact on you? Or are they just there just to make you a little bit tense because they just did a very loud noise? If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to click that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. That way you could go ahead and be notified for future videos. And be sure to like and comment down below, what did you think of Werewolf by Night and whether or not you thought it was scary or not. Okay, so how are the jump scares in this movie, or are there any jump scares in here? There's definitely 2 in here, and I think there's kind of a third one, but 2 of them are not necessarily that good of jump scares. One of them is kind of a fake out, the other one is expected to come at you, and you're not necessarily that frightened when it happens. But there is definitely one bit of a scare that is unexpected, and it happens at the very beginning, and you'll know what I'm talking about. This short is pretty lackluster in terms of creating jump scares. It's definitely more of a action or story kind of horror film, rather than having moments where it lingers and waits or is trying to cause tension and have that be the aspect of how scary the movie can get. So for jump scares, it's honestly going to get itself a 1 out of 5. There isn't really much to say about it. So now that we calculated every single one of these brackets, it's time to go ahead and give you guys the actual percentage of how scary Werewolf by Night is. So when calculating all 4 of these brackets, Werewolf by Night calculated itself up to be 55% scary. In theory, there are concepts that make Werewolf by Night somewhat scary, but when you look at it as a whole in terms of execution, you're not really going to be traumatized or have a lot of fearful moments when watching this. It isn't necessarily one of the most scariest things that the MCU has created. In fact, I think Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is slightly scarier than this one. But that doesn't mean that it isn't a bad movie to watch. What did you think of Marvel's Werewolf by Night? Did you think it was scary, or did you think it was not that scary? Did you agree with this rating system, or do you think that this needs to be a little bit updated? Put your thoughts down in the comment section below, and let's have a conversation about it. And like this video if you agree with what I say, or dislike this video if you disagree with what I say. I don't mind the dislikes. So that is it I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video.